I guess what I can say first, for all of you who don't know who I am, my name is Henrik Palmgrens, I come from Sweden, behind the website Red Eyes Creations. We do radio programs and news updates, tons of other stuff as well. Very thankful for Karen for inviting me. This is my first public talk, by the way, so thank you for Karen for giving me the opportunity to present some of the information about some of this stuff. And I'm going to move quite fast through some of the information, so hopefully you'll be able to keep up. I have tons of slides to show you in terms of the hidden roots of the European Union. There's lots to say, obviously, so much to say, so much information. I will do my best to give you an idea of what we are talking about here. I've chosen to focus on a few things. Mythology, symbols, the founding fathers, the official and unofficial origins, pretty much, of the European Union. The Roman Catholic connection, symbolism of the treaties of the European Union. And all these symbols you see down here obviously are connected to what I'll be talking about. IHS, Jesuits, the International Pan-European Movement or Union, the Knights of Malta, a little bit on Freemasonry, a little bit on Zionism as well. There's a lot of connections here that there's just simply not time to go into. But these are all part of it. The House of Habsburg, right there, the Vatican, the Holy See, and the British royal family a little bit as well is some of the things that I'll be touching upon. But let's begin at the beginning of the story, Europa, and talk about the mythology pretty much, and see where the story begins. It goes like this pretty much, that Zeus, king of the gods, saw Europa gathering flowers at the sea. He fell in love with her. He transformed himself into a form of a magnificent white bull and appeared at the seashore where Europa was playing. The great bull walked gently over to where Europa stood. She put flowers around his neck, climbed upon his back, overcoming her fear of the great beast. Suddenly the bull rushed out to the sea, abducting Europa. Zeus took Europa to the Mediterranean island of Crete. And there Zeus cast off the shape of the white bull and back into his human form made Europa his lover. Europa became the first queen of Crete and had by Zeus 3 sons, one of these being King Minos of Crete. She later married the king of Crete, who adopted her sons, and she was worshipped under the name of Helotia in Crete. Zeus also reproduced the shape of the white bull in the stars. Today we can recognize its shape as the constellation of Taurus. And university professor from Munich, Michael Rappengluck, believes that Taurus is represented in a cave painting at the Hall of the Bulls in the caves at Lascaux in France, dated to roughly about 15,000 BC, which he believes is accompanied by a depiction of the Pleiades. Taurus marked this point of the vernal equinox in the early Bronze Age. This is the age of Taurus we're talking about here. The Pleiades were closest to the sun at the vernal equinox around the 23rd century BC. In Babylonian astronomy, the constellation was listed as the heavenly bull. In Greek mythology, Taurus was identified with Zeus, as we just mentioned, and the myth informs names of the constellation since it's necessary to traverse the area of the sky known as the sea, or the heavens, to reach it. Keep that in mind as well. And this is one passing through the zodiac. It forms the origin of the myth of the Cretan bull, and one of the 12 labors of Heracles or Hercules. So let's just look quickly here at what we are looking at. She came from the ancient world, this Phoenician princess. She travels willingly, or just she's abducted, as it were, by Zeus from Tyre in Lebanon. This is the modern name that we have for it now. Over to Crete, the bottom of Europa, pretty much. This might be symbolic in one reference as well of the age of Taurus transitioning over to the age of Aries. Keep that in mind as well. We'll touch upon that later. So she came from the land of Canaan, the ancient world. She was a Phoenician princess, as I mentioned today, Tyre in Lebanon. There's a very interesting connection in terms of Tyre as well when it comes to something called Tyrrhenian purple, or royal imperial purple. And there's actually a relationship between the Minoans of Crete and the Tyrrhenians and how this was extracted, but we don't have simply time to go into that right now. So here's Europa, the Phoenician princess, the goddess, if you will, depicted on an old map. This is known as theurgy in some circles. You take the goddess, you take some heavenly image in a way and place it over to the physical, onto the physical land itself. And this is kind of representing the completion of that. Allegedly, Charlemagne also was the one who dubbed the continent after Europa. So what's in Crete? As I mentioned, we have the Knossos Palace, magnificent building, sometimes referred to as the Knossos Palace of King Minos, sometimes just called the Labyrinth. I think there's similarity in terms of the words Knossos and Gnosis, or knowledge, if you will. Interesting side note there. And even the idea of the labyrinth could be a veiled term for the brain, actually, if you look at it that way, from the outside, with its all its little shapes and pathways and neural networks, even in one way. So it could be implying intelligence or reasoning or thought, if you will. But look at the snake goddess here. That's what's interesting in this, too. This is a Minoan statuette from around 1600 BCE. She's holding two snakes in her hands, in some way implying that she is mastering the snake, in that sense. Could also be knowledge of DNA, by the way. She has a bare breast. This will come up later. Keep that in mind. And just as a side note, here is actually a runestone from Gotland in Sweden, where I'm from, that is very similar. I don't know if everyone can see that. It's down at the bottom there. Very similar to this goddess as well, obviously, holding two snakes and so forth. There is a relationship between many Norse ancient civilizations and the Middle Eastern civilizations as well, I believe. And just to kind of emphasize our point further, Will Durant, who wrote the book The Life of Greece, The Story of Civilization in 1939, said about the Minoan civilization that it's the first link in the European chain, and that just kind of just emphasizes our point of what I'm trying to get to here in that sense. So let's look at the etymology of Europa. She's a watcher in a way, you can say. Eur, meaning broad or wide. Op or opt or opa means eye. So in one way she has big eyes, she's wide gazing, she has intelligence, she's open-minded. In one way she's enlightened because she has these big eyes, as it were. You can even see the kind of bug-eyed look that statuette has right there. Pretty creepy, but interesting. The question is then if we can look at Eve actually in the same way. I call her another kind of snake goddess because of the fact that she has a relationship with the snake. She gains knowledge by eating from the fruit or the apples from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the question I pose here is Eve Europa, because the idea of the Minoan statuette there is that she is probably a depiction of Europa. That same legend is carried over into Crete. So I believe that statue actually is Europa in that sense. And the relationship is to Eve here, the snake goddess of gnosis, Gnostic knowledge, etc. The apples of enlightenment comes up in Norse mythology as well. The story of Idun or Idun. She is the guardian, if you will, of the apples or the fruit of knowledge. She was a wife of Bragi or Bragi, a wise deity related to the moon. So who is Europa, anyway, if we ask that question? Protestant minister Alexander Hislop writes in The Two Babylons, 1853, that Semiramis was an actual person in ancient Mesopotamia who invented polytheism and with it goddess worship. I personally don't believe that that's the case. I think goddess worship probably was around before the worship of a god. Before that probably it was animal worship, like the bull, the snakes as we saw, the bear or something. But anyway, let's leave that for now. Just continue and see what he has to say here. Hislop believed that Semiramis was a consort of Nimrod, builder of the Bible's Tower of Babel. Keep that in mind as that come up later as well. He maintained that all divine pairings in world myths and religions depicted in art, like Isis, Osiris, Aphrodite, Cupid, Asherah, Orion, Mary, Jesus, and others, are retelling of that same tale in one way of Semiramis and Tammuz. And Semiramis, he says, goes on to become the Blessed Virgin Mary, according to Hislop's books. This attempts to support his claim that Roman Catholicism is, in fact, paganism. I think that there is something to this story in terms of if we compare mythologies from around the world, there seems to be a central theme that is brought up again and again. And I think we can do the divine pairing here of Europa or Zeus as well, or at least King Minos being the offspring of Europa and Zeus then. And although Rome might be based on paganism, it doesn't mean that it's a good version of it. I see it rather as a bad copy, if you will, than in that sense. But let's leave that for now. But again, I think it's something to what Hislop mentioned here, that Mary, Virgin Mary, basically is Semiramis in that sense, equivalent of all these other goddesses. Europa is also associated with the moon. Here's Lucian of Samosa of Sidon in Phoenicia talking about the temple of Astarte, and that the Phoenicians venerated Europe at this temple when she disappeared off the face of the earth, as it was. So here is some more in terms of the goddesses from the ancient world that possesses these qualities of light and beauty, enlightenment in that sense, intelligence and even seduction. Sometimes associated with the sun, sometimes with the moon. Astarte in Europe in one way are the same, then we can say. Isis, Ishtar, Inanna, Astarte, Semiramis, Venus, or even Lucifer actually comes into this as well, as we'll see. Or Hathor, Diana, Turant, or Tanit. There's so many of these. Virgin Mary in the extension, as we'll see. But just take a look at these symbols here, how similar they are. This is the Minoan statue. This is Tanit, a Phoenician moon goddess. And this is, you have the pyramid and the radiance of the head, with the eyes right there in one way, and the dividing line. Very similar to the all-seeing eye. Interesting. And just this is actually the symbol as well for the Apis bull, or Serapis symbol. So in one way it could be female, and in one way it could be male as well. But here are some more with the same pose. Diana, Luna, bringer of light, Mary, star of the sea. Very similar pose as well. The arms stretch out, holding something in her hands sometimes. Radiance of the head, with the sun behind her, etc. You get the idea. The bull, the cow, Apis sometimes was associated with the sun, and sometimes as Hathor here depicted, as the cow goddess in a way. Her horns is associated with the moon, because of the woman's menstrual cycles and all that stuff too. We can read a little bit here. In recent years, the theory of matriarchal culture exists in profusion before 3000 BC, has taken root and bring into question the interpretation of Hathor as only wife or only mother. Hathor wears the headdress of 18 serpents, traditionally associated with wisdom and women. The cow horns were associated with the crescent moon and thus a woman's menstrual cycles. Hathor may have quite possibly been the original mother god of the Egyptian citizens. And in terms of the male, we have the bull Zeus or Apis, sometimes depicted in the shape of a man with the head of a bull, just like the story of the Minotaur at Knossos as well, if you're familiar with that. I could do a whole thing on bull worship right here as well, and bull symbolism coming up everywhere. There just isn't time, but you get the idea. It's in the modern world: Chicago Bulls, New York Stock Exchange, Lascaux Caves, etc. Spain, Persia, Rome. Side note, interesting, Knossos, the palace there, they have a fresco of something they call bull jumping. It's in Ethiopia, it's in Spain as well. They jump over the bull. They might be symbolic. I don't know what it means actually. It might just be symbolic in terms of the fact that they master the bull. They manage to kind of jump over if we look at Zeus as a kind of the one all-seeing, all-knowing God in that sense, they're jumping over it. They're skipping Zeus in one way. Don't know, you might have another interpretation of that, what that means. But just to bring it all back into context, what we're talking about here, the abduction of Europa. The European Union knows about this stuff, and they put it on their coins. Here's the European Council building in Brussels, Belgium. Europa and the beast, the woman riding the beast. Here's in Strasbourg, France. So let's look at the question, is she associated with the sun or the moon? Which one of these is it? Sometimes it's the moon, sometimes it's the sun. My take on this is it's both, actually. She's the woman of the apocalypse. If we look at book of Revelation 12, chapter 1, let's all pray. She says, we read, and a great sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and on her head a crown of 12 stars, the 12 stars of the European Union. It's Europa, or the Mother of God, Virgin Mary, the Queen of Heaven. Isis, Inanna, Aphrodite, Astarte, Semiramis, you do get the idea. From Secret Teachings of All Ages by Henrik Palmgrens in the Mystery of the Apocalypse chapter, he writes, "This woman represents the constellation of Virgo, and also the Egyptian Isis, who, about to be delivered of her son Horus, is attacked by Typhon, or Typhoon, the latter attempting to destroy the child predestined by the gods to slay the spirit of evil. The war in heaven relates to the destruction of the planet Ragnarök and the fall of the angels. The Virgin can be interpreted to signify the secret doctrine itself, and her son, the initiate born out of the womb of the mysteries." Here's some more images for you in terms of the woman of the apocalypse, clothed in the sun, standing on the moon. Some more here for you, 12 with the 12 stars, obviously. Indiana, interesting flag there, by the way, the torch of liberty in that sense. Diana, the moon goddess, obviously. So we're talking about the Queen of Heaven here, Mary, Star of the Sea, Stella Maris. This is Mariology, known as Mariology. Mare, or Mar, simply means ocean or sea. It connects with that idea again that the sea is the heavens is the sea. This is a statue, by the way, in Malta, connected with the Vatican through the Knights of Malta, obviously. She has the 12 stars, as I said, and the 5-pointed star, or Venus, here on her breast. There's another one of these, Stella Maris, on a monastery in Haifa, Israel, by the way, as well. So, we'll return to that 5-pointed star shortly, but for now then, the EU flag, let's look at this. 12 signs popping up everywhere. Signs of the zodiac, hours of the day, months in a year, you get the idea, 12 tribes of Israel, etc. The flag was designed by Arseny Heitz, adopted by the Council of Europe on December 8th, 1955. It was 15 members at that time, so it has nothing to do with the number of members. December 8th also is the Feast of the Immaculate Conception of Mary. Classical pictures of Mary has blue background and 12 stars. Heitz revealed to a French magazine that he thought of 12 stars in a circle on a blue background as it represents the traditional iconography of the image of the Immaculate Conception. As a devoted devotee of the Virgin Mary, he noticed the words of the Apocalypse from Revelation 12:1 that we read before as a source of inspiration. There's a number of other people who have realized this as well, that we don't have time to talk about. The Imperium Marianum, Mary's Imperial Kingdom, that's what they're in one way attributing the flag to in that sense here. And just on a funny side note, the Imperial Crown of the Holy Roman Empire has 144 stones decorating it, 12 times 12, 144. Don't know if there's a connection. Let's talk about Europa again then. Here's another statue of her outside the... where's this? Espace Leopold. This is in Brussels, actually. It's one of the parliament buildings. This is Europe, the goddess here again then, holding the E. You can interpret this in many different ways. You can talk about it in terms of the epsilon, the fifth letter of the alphabet, in the Greek alphabet, epsilon, E. It's 5, or as I say in French, femme, for female. We even say femme in Sweden for 5, F-E-M. It's the pentagram in that sense. It's the fifth letter, 5, pentacle. And she is also then associated in that sense with the with Lucifer, as we'll see, or Venus actually. How does that work? Well, it works like this. Venus, don't know if you can see that properly. From the point of view of Earth, Venus makes a form of a pentagram or pentacle around the Earth every 8 years as it progresses through. It's the first, in that sense, image that we have of the connection between Venus, the goddess of light, like Lucifer, the morning star, with Venus, or with, in that sense, then Europa in the extensions. He has the 5-pointed star on her breast, as it were. From my point of view, this is not like evil or anything like that. I'm just trying to follow the mythology and some of the themes of where this is coming from. And the interpretation of this, obviously, I leave up to you. This is an interesting side note here. Louise Weiss, this is the parliamentary building in Strasbourg. The building is named after this lady, by the way, this one here. One could interpret her name to literally means white light, or Lucifer white. Louise for Louis or Lucius, Lux, light, Lucifer. Weiss is German for white, or if you want to be, look at it from the point of view that she is simply Weiss. She was a French author, journalist, feminist, and European politician from the area of Alsace, that comes from the German river Ill. Don't know if you know about the Illies, or the Illuminati in this case. Very interesting point. The biggest city in this region is Strasbourg. We'll return to this later. Louise Weiss was a suffragette and founded the association La Femme Nouvelle. This is the new woman. I don't know if you guys have heard some of the presentations by Jordan Maxwell. He talks about the new man. Well, this lady brought in the idea of the new woman. Really interesting stuff. In 1979, she was elected to the European Party, etc. You might get the idea here. So just interesting side note. So let's look at the European Parliament again, this same building, Louise Weiss building in Strasbourg. There it is. Tower of Babel, the famous painting by Peter Bruegel the Elder, Flemish artist. And let's combine them. This is the Tower of Babel. I don't know, you might have seen this before. What are these guys up to here? What is the implication here? They even left it kind of unfinished, as it were, just as this depiction of Peter Bruegel in the Tower of Babel as a work in process. The great work, in that sense, is in process. And if you think I'm just out and finding things that aren't there, this is a poster from the European Union themselves, which incorporates the whole idea. Europe, many tongues, one voice. That's the whole idea of Tower of Babel. They're splitting up the languages and all that stuff too. So what's going on here? It's this biblical prophecy being fulfilled. If you read from Professor Arthur Noble, he writes on Ian Paisley's website, European Institute of Protestant Studies, Roman Catholic imagery is endemic in Europe and has been enthusiastically embraced by the European Parliament. It has starting similarities to the prophecies of Daniel chapter 2 and Revelation chapter 17, which theologians from Wycliffe to Spurgeon have consistently identified as representing papal Rome. They depict a latter-day political union which in its final form will consist of 10 nations or groups of nations dominated by a power which sits upon 7 hills, Rome. This vision is of a great whore riding the beast with 7 heads and 10 horns and bearing the name Mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother harlots and abominations of the earth. Today this prophecy is being fulfilled before our very eyes. Europe is Vatican-inspired and Vatican-controlled. This is what I call, in that sense, the Armageddon program. It's part of the Apocalypse program. I personally don't believe that it's prophecy being fulfilled. I think it's the blueprint, if you will, of the Bible that is being implemented here. They're using these symbols and powerful messages to some way to bring these things in. In some cases, there might even be people out there who are anticipating this because of the consequence, the return of Jesus and all that stuff too. So they're using these potent and powerful symbols to portray this. Strasbourg, as we mentioned before, the head of the European Parliament, Louise Weiss building. Interesting design, by the way, similarity. The seat of the Council of Europe, which is, is here. Eurocorps, the new army that is being built up as well. Strasbourg overall is very important. In Fire in the Minds of Men by James H. Billington, he discusses how the revolutionary movement basically started and has its roots in Strasbourg, actually. And that's why I think they placed the buildings here as well. It was an imperial city important to the Carolingian Empire and was the center of humanist scholarship and early book printing in the Holy Roman Empire. A lot of things to say about Strasbourg overall. At one point, even the spire of the cathedral in Strasbourg was replaced by a Phrygian cap, or a tin Phrygian cap was placed on top of it, for those who know the symbolism of the Phrygian cap. There it is up there, in case you didn't know that. And it dovetails with the revolutionary movement, the Age of Enlightenment. The woman again, look at that, that's the image, the famous image from, who was it now again here? Lacroix, I think it's painted this. Liberty leading the people. She's bare-breasted again, like the Minoan's goddess statuette. In her arms she holds a flag and a gun, or rifle, instead of the 2 snakes. But very similar. She's wearing the Phrygian cap as well. Look at this socialist symbol here, or communist symbol. The Roman olive branches behind, the 5-pointed star of Lucifer, in that sense, that we talked about before, and the white hand getting ready to clutch the torch of enlightenment, as it were, in that sense. We're talking about the Illuminati here in one sense. Although he set up shop in Bavaria, I think that a lot of the ideas that he got stems from Strasbourg, actually. So much to say, but we'll move on for now. The All-Seeing Europe. Let's look at some of this stuff. Project Galileo, or the global navigation satellite system that is designed to rival or compete with the GPS system. You're paying for it. It costs 3.4 billion euros. The system would store 19 pieces of sensitive passenger information, including email addresses, telephone numbers, and payment details of flight tickets for 13 years. It's a whole system they're building up there. Project INDECT, Intelligent Information System supporting observation, searching, and detecting for security of citizens in urban environment. That's a mouthful for right there. This is also very similar in terms of Project Galileo. These might well connect at some point as well and cross-share information or what have you. It's basically a 21st century panopticon that they're building up. A beast surveillance system has been called. That monitors everything from websites to discussion forums to peer-to-peer networks, individual computer systems, in order to detect what they call abnormal behavior, whatever that is, and suspicious behavior in that sense, by analyzing the pitch of people's voices as well as the way your body moves. You know, you pay for it as well, by the way. Here's European Audiovisual Observatory, the all-seeing eye, the Concilium, or the Council of the European Union. And these guys are the real guys in charge in that sense. Forget about the Parliament, the European Parliament, even the European Commission in that sense. The Council of Europe, European Union, they're really in charge. Side note, very interesting, the all-seeing euro. Look at this. This is the euro. The schematics, the maths, the alignment stuff. Turn it on its sides, and we can actually see incorporated into the design of it, if you will. A pyramid with a capstone slightly removed in that sense. If we supplant the image with a true schematic of the Great Pyramid, don't know if you can see that properly, but right there, where the circle ends right there, is the shafts leading from the King's Chamber. Dovetails right with the inner circle, as it were, of the euro. And just in case you didn't have enough, Europe and You in 2007, snapshot of EU achievements. Let's go into a little bit more in detail in terms of the hidden roots then of the European Union, and talk about some of the history and historical unification attempts in the past. I would put in Alexander the Great here as well. He moved his empire, so to speak, a little bit more towards the east, but anyway, he spearheaded a lot of this stuff as well. The Roman Republic and later the Roman Empire eventually splits up into the Western Roman Empire and the Byzantine Empire. Keep an eye on the double-headed eagle there as well, by the way. And then we have the Merovingian dynasty, the Frankish Empire, later turned into the Carolingian Empire. This is the expansion then specifically during the Frankish Empire, as it were. Then we have the Holy Roman Empire. This is known as the First Reich. The double-headed eagle is back there. The First French Empire, or Napoleon's Empire, the eagle. Austro-Hungarian Empire, or House of Habsburg, comes up. The double-headed eagle is there again. The Second Reich, German Empire. You have National Socialism then. The Third Reich popping up on the scene. Nazi Germany. Then we have the United States of Europe, or the European Union, what I call the New Holy Roman Empire in that sense. And I put the inception date to 1923, around that time. We'll look at that more in detail later on. Let's see if we can get some audio on this as well, because I'm going to play a quick clip here as well. This is Jose Manuel Barroso, and just going to the European Commission themselves and see what they think about all this. What does all this mean? Sorry, let's go back. There we go. See if we can click on this.
Sometimes I like to compare the European Union as a creation to the organization of empires. The empires. And because we have the dimension of empires. But there is a great difference. The empires were usually made through force, with a center that was imposing a diktat, a will on the others. And now we have what some authors call the first non-imperial empire. We have, by dimension, 27 countries that freely decided to work together to pool their sovereignties, if you want to use that concept of sovereignty, and work together to add value. I believe it's a great construction, and we should be proud of it. At least we in the Commission are proud.
I'm sure they are. I'm sure they're very proud. Sounds lovely in one way at the end there, but at the same time I think that they are, creating a kind of a European monoculture in that sense. He's talking about sovereignty here. This will obviously prove itself in history if it's true or not, but they're in one way eroding nationalities in that sense. If that's good or bad, that's up to you obviously, but it's just interesting to hear what they say about it themselves, what the European Union is. And so who is, in that sense, Jose Manuel Barroso? He's a former head of actually the Maoist student He was a student leader for the Maoists, rather, under the Portuguese Workers' Communist Party. Here he's talking to the cameras down there. Again, the future EU Commission. We're talking about the revolutionary movement pretty much here in that sense. I mean, look at the symbolism here as well, obviously, of the Communist Party in Portugal. The star again, the five-pointed star that we mentioned, talked about before. The hammer of industrialism or warfare, if you want to look at it that way, and the sickle of Saturn, or of death, Kronos. On the surface, I think we could say that the church, the Roman Church and communism are arch enemies in that sense. It might be ridiculous to claim that these two sides are on the same page, but I say that they're opposites. This is just a different mentality of how to implement the philosophy, pretty much. And even the founder of the International Pan-European Union that we'll look in a minute here, Count Richard Nicholas von Coudenhove-Kalergi, believes that he believed in a more socialist Christian structure, very anti-consumerism. And he's basically behind the roots of the European Union himself. This is the guy right here. This is their symbol. Look at that more later. And according to him, the Pan-European Union, the International Pan-European Union, would encompass and extend a more flexible and competitive Austro-Hungaria, with English serve as the world language spoken by everyone in addition to his native tongue. He predicted that individualism and socialism would learn to cooperate instead of compete, and urged that capitalism and communism cross-fertilize each other, just as the Protestant Reformation had spurred the Catholic Church to regenerate itself. Schilling side note, EWPA, aka also known as the Red House Report. Adam Labor uncovered US military intelligence reports that stated that top Nazis secretly met at the Maison Rogue Hotel in Strasbourg, that's that again, on August 10th, 1944, knowing Germany was on the brink of military defeat, conspired to create a Fourth Reich, a pan-European economic empire based around the European Common Market, a European Common Market. Top Nazi industrialists were ordered by SS Obergruppenführer Dr. Scheid to set up front companies abroad and pose as democrats in order to achieve economic penetration and lay the foundation for the re-emergence of the Nazi Party. Oops. So what's the official version of the European Union? In the ruins after World War II, obviously, the idea is that the European Union emerged as a kind of from the ashes as a natural reaction. This is to prevent further carnage in the world, primarily on the European continent, that suffered the most from the world wars. But the most fundamental misconception about how the European Union came into being stems from the myth that this intellectual genesis emerged after the Second World War. All the essential ideas which lay behind the moves to unite Europe at the time had in fact been conceived in the 1920s, before the rise of Hitler. But officially then the world wars are the excuse, if you will, to create the European Union. Ideas on European unity, we don't have time to go into all of this. This is just to show you that pre-World War II ideas. Some more for you here, 31 leading up to the 40s, a little bit after or during World War II. We simply don't have time to go into that. The founding fathers of the European Union, some of them at least, Count Richard Coudenhove-Kalergi, as we talked about, Paul Hermé Spaak, Robert Schuman, John Monnet, Konrad Adenauer, Joseph Beck, Johann Wilhelm Bien, and de Gasperi as well. Many of these were Roman Catholics, sometimes Jesuit-educated guys. They belonged to Christian Democrats or Christian social people's parties. Again, I'm not saying that that's bad or anything, I'm just pointing that fact out for you. Considering how strange it is with all the mixing of these kind of occult symbols that we've been looking at and these Christians, or so-called Christians, I don't know. Let's look at Kalergi a little bit more here. He's the son of an Austro-Hungarian count, educated at a Jesuit college in Kalixburg, Vienna. And Kalergis was a wealthy Cretan family. Comes up again there. Their roots tracing back to the Byzantine royalty via Venetian aristocracy. Oops. Founder of the Pan-European movement together with Archduke Otto von Habsburg. Joined a Masonic lodge in Vienna in the early 1920s, predicted that individualism and socialism, as we said before, would learn to kind of cooperate. Advocated a revival of Charlemagne's empire. He received the first annual Karls Prize Award, or Charlemagne Award, by the city of Aachen in Germany in 1950. He called for a European single currency 9 years before it even was discussed at the secret Bilderberg meeting in 1955. He proposed Ode to Joy as the anthem of the EU, was implemented 6 years later. And he has an interesting quote here that I want to read to you as well. The man of the future will be of mixed race. Today's races and classes will gradually disappear, owning the vanishing of space, time and prejudice. The Eurasian Negroid race of the future, similar in its appearance to the ancient Egyptians, will replace diversity of people with diversity of individuals. I'm not coming to this from a point of view of racism or preserving races or anything like that, but I'm just saying that it's interesting that he brings up the idea of the Egyptians, that we're going to look at the ancient Egyptians in that sense again. And also the fact that he's advocating a class-free society when at least his foundations, if you will, then are creating this kind of elite class, Euro elites I call them in that sense, that are living like princes off of the EU budget that everyone here, you know, pays for if you're from Europe in that sense. So his ideas might have been they might have been mistaken and implemented in the wrong way. Who knows? But you know, there you have it anyway. Freemason receiving the Cause Prize Award, Charlemagne Award. The flag of the Pan-European Union movement, a red cross on a golden sun, a yellow sun with the 12 stars going around it. There's a lot to say about that, but we don't have too much time. Here it is in black and white, the proposal for the Pan-European idea, 1932, that's the actual signing of those documents. Here's Otto von Habsburg, friend of the Pope, member of former head of the House of Habsburg. He is the international honorary president of the International Pan-European Union today, after Kalergi died back in the 70s, I think. Former member of the European Parliament, Christian Social Union of Bavaria, he was representing. Here's Otto von Habsburg shaking hands with Karl, one of his sons, one of his 7 kids, Karl von Habsburg or Lorraine, initiating him into the Order of Saint Sebastian in or of Europe. Some interesting European emblems for you down there to study. An interesting kind of rainbow priest in the background for that too. Karl Habsburg with his father shaking out the European Parliament. He is the current head of the Austrian branch of the Order of the Golden Fleece, founder and president of the organization Pan-Europe, Austria, elected to the European Parliament via ÖVP, Australian People's Party, head of the House of Habsburg right now. Swedish lady, one of his daughters, Walburga, Archduchess Walburga of Austria. German-Swedish lawyer, politician, joined the Moderate Party in 2006. She worked as an assistant in the European Parliament. She's suspected to have very leading roles in the EU in the future because of her royal connections. She's already successfully pushing proposals in Sweden to always hang the European flag next to the Swedish flag in schools and in Parliament buildings and things like that too. Archduke George of Austria, another one of his sons, Otto von Habsburg's sons. He's the president of the Red Cross in Hungary, a knight of the Order of the Golden Fleece, strong supporter of the enlargement of Europe. On May 1st, note that date for all you symbolists out there, 2004, he was chair at the Grand Europe Ball, a black tie charitable gala held at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York to celebrate the historic occasion when 8 Central and Eastern European countries joined the EU. So what I'm getting at here is that these boys are working not behind the scenes, really, they're on the scene in that sense now. Francis II, the last Holy Roman Empire, of the House of Habsburg, Lorraine, and in that sense they're coming back, right? They're bringing these people back into place. Paul Henry Spaak, we have a lot that we can say about him. Stick to a few points. He's behind the European coal and steel community that laid a foundation for the European Union. In 1956 he authored the Spaak Report, which laid the foundation of the Treaty of Rome the following year. The first building of the European Parliament in Brussels was named after him. In 1957 he received the Charlemagne Award. He is a Bilderberger as well. One of his attachés, as call it, under Paul Henry Spaak was Etienne Viscount d'Avignon. He's also very prominent in terms of the Bilderbergers, and he's the president of the Bilderberg Steering Committee, president of Egmont Royal Institute for International Relations, president of the Brussels-based think tank Friends of Europe. Baron Robert Rothschild, you probably heard about the Rothschild family. In 1954 he was appointed chief of staff of Paul Henry Spaak, as we mentioned before, at the Belgian Foreign Ministry. He worked together with Spock on the Treaty of Rome. Before the signing of the treaty in '57, he was behind the formation of the European Economic Community. In that sense, a no-brainer, considering the money there behind. Shortly before the Treaty of Rome was signed, Rothschild was standing beside Spock, gazing over the Forum Romanum in Rome, when Spock said, "I think that we have re-established the Roman Empire without a single shot being fired." Let's look at another clip in terms of the signing of the Treaty of Rome. Keeps on doing that, sorry about that. There we go. Signing of blank pages.
You sometimes hear Eurosceptics complain that signing up to the European Union is like signing a blank cheque, which allows Brussels to draw as much power as it wants away from Westminster. Well, that could be closer to the truth than anyone had imagined, according to some evidence uncovered by our colleague Alan Little. Alan's been making a Radio 4 documentary to mark the 50th anniversary of the Treaty of Rome, and he's uncovered some intriguing details about what really happened 50 years ago.
The governments were able to say to their electorates, oh, this is purely economic. And we knew there was never any secret that the end was political.
They laboured for 9 months, transforming themselves into a new kind of officialdom. These were the first of the Eurocrats. And they set a certain, now familiar, tone. They worked beyond the gaze of public scrutiny, often in secrecy and without reference to public opinion. They gathered in Rome in such haste that the Italian state printer had not met the deadline. The treaty was not printed. And so, in great ceremony and solemnity, 6 heads of government put their signatures that day to a treaty that was, apart from the title page at the front and the signature page at the back, composed entirely of blank pages. Pierre Pescator from Luxembourg was one of the lawyers that wrote the treaty.
They signed a bundle of blank pages. The first title existed in 4 languages, and also the protocol at the end. Nobody looked at what was in between.
They didn't show that to the television cameras, and the European train that pulled out that day is still rolling.
We're now joined by David Willey, who for many years has been the BBC's Rome correspondent and covered the signing of the Treaty of Rome for the Reuters news agency. David, you missed the scoop.
Well, I missed the scoop of the century, apparently. I remember seeing the signing ceremony. It was very impressive. It took place in the Capitoline Hill building, the palace designed by Michelangelo. It was all very solemn. Everyone was wearing frock coats or morning dress, and there was a large press contingent there, of which I was just a very humble member.
And the idea, presumably, of holding the signing ceremony in Rome on the Capitol, the heart, really, of the old Rome, was presumably symbolic, referring back to a time when Europe, well, it was united, albeit under somebody's power.
Well, the founding fathers of the European Union had to go back a long time in history, and they thought logically that all roads led somehow to Rome.
Right. Is that even legal? I mean, I don't know. Can you sign blank pages like that? Just a question, you know. All those roads lead to Rome in that sense. Capitoline Hill. Here we have the guys here. Tony Blair signing the Treaty of Rome. This is the extension of that when they tried to bring in the European Constitution in 2004. This is a signing process here in front of Pope Innocent the 10th. Don't know if he was that innocent, but let's leave that for now. Tony Blair, here they are in the Julius Caesar Hall doing some speeches before that time. Romano Prodi, Valerie Giscard d'Estaing, very important in terms of the architects of writing the Constitution and later the Lisbon Treaty. Silvio Berlusconi, lovely man. Tony Blair, the guy who put mass into mass murder in that sense. War criminal. Liar, if you will, in that sense, recently converted to Catholicism. Many people thought that this guy would be the first European president for that reason. But this guy is brought onto the scene instead. Herman Van Rompuy. He's your current EU president. Enjoy. You didn't get to elect him. He was selected. Jesuit-trained Bilderberger attendee. I call this guy the tax man as well. Here he's been signed in with Prince Albert, I think, II of Belgium or something like that. At a meeting at the Castle of Valley of Duchess for a meeting held by the Bilderberg Group on 12th of November 2009, Van Rompuy made a speech about his vision of the European governance. He talked about applying a European Union-wide green tax to cover social security expenses. Okay, great. It's not enough with what they get already. I think it's about £220 from each individual in Europe. That's about 500 million people. Do the math on that. You see the amount of money that these guys are working on or with. So after his proposition of this at the Bilderberg meeting, he was elected president. And as I said, he's now the president. Herman Van Rompuy has some interesting background then as well from American Magazine, a weekly magazine published by the American Jesuits in regards to the Roman Catholic Church, writes the following. One interesting thing about Mr. Van Rompuy is his Catholicism, about which he makes no bones. He was educated by Jesuits in Brussels, went on to the Catholic University of Louvain, and in 1980s wrote a book about Christendom as a modern idea. He is, in short, a bearer of the torch first lit by the Catholic architects of European unity, like de Gasperi, Schumann, Adenauer, who, like Van Rompuy, were all Christian Democrats for whom faith and Europe went together. Here is the 33rd issue of the newsletter of the British province of the Society of Jesus. November 2009, by the way. Notice that date, the similarity to when Van Rompuy makes his suggestions. Here's Duke of Edinburgh with Ban Ki-moon, the UN Secretary. The British province represented Father General at the Windsor Castle at the beginning of this month accepted a certificate from His Royal Highness, the Duke of Edinburgh, and the UN Secretary General, His Excellency Mr. Ban Ki-moon, for the work that the Society of Jesus has applied to drawing up its 7-year plan for the environment. Just interesting, you know, I thought that these guys were Anglican in that sense. Doesn't mean that they can't work with, you know, the Jesuit order, of course, but there you have it. I guess this guy as well, don't have heard about some of his quotes. Allegedly, he said that he'd like to be reincarnated as a deadly virus or whatever. He's behind the wild, to bring down human population. He's behind the Worldwide Life Foundation as well, so I guess he doesn't have any objections in terms of the green taxes and all that stuff too. After the failure of the constitutional treaty, I'm beginning to round up here now for you guys who want to take a break, but just a few more slides, a few more notes here. After the failure of the constitutional treaty in 2005, as mentioned before, the Eurocrats whip up the Lisbon Treaty. The Dutch and the French voted no, so they turn it over into a treaty and says, you know, let's not vote on this thing then. Okay, bring it in. The leaders are here at the Jerónimos Monastery in Portugal, in Lisbon, posing as they were. The Ireland was the only country, as you probably know, who voted for the Lisbon Treaty, the implementation of that. They said no in 2008. Eurocrats say no, that's wrong, bringing in the economic situation. They vote yes in 2009, and now we're all under the Treaty of Lisbon. It was signed on December 13th. This is symbolic, a symbolic date, if you ask me. This is St. Lucy's Day, or Lucia, as we say in Swedish, and actually a holiday celebrated primarily in Sweden and in northern Italy. She's the patron saint. Lucy is the patron saint of the blind. Lucy, Lucia, Lucifer, light, all the story again. Here she is with the eyes, of course, right there. And she's the bringer of light in that sense. It's happening at the darkest point of the year, 13th of December, according to the old Julian calendar of counting. So it's interesting, symbolic date. They do a lot of things on a symbolic note. BBC says a symbol of the building of the modern world when the guys signed the Treaty of Lisbon. Go into some detail in terms of the Jerónimos Monastery, as I mentioned before, designed by King Manuel I to commemorate Vasco da Gama's voyage to India. It's a hermitage where the monks of the Order of the Christ, a Portuguese successor to the Knights of Templar, were residing. Henry the Navigator is featured prominently there, which connects with maritime symbolism, navigation, sea, Virgin Mary even in the extension. This is some of the pictures from the interior there, with corals and ropes and beautifully decorated. The signing of the Lisbon Treaty. What happened in the UK then? The Queen signed what they call goatskins, instruments of ratification as they call it. Both houses of Parliament had to pass the Lisbon Treaty. They are then sealed, bound in blue leather, deposited with the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Rome. So again, we're back to Rome and things that the royal British family is doing, signing documents, or is ending up in Rome. The Knights of Malta, military arm of the Vatican, This is Andrew Bertie. I think he's the third cousin twice removed from Queen Elizabeth II. He was the current head of the order of the Sovereign Military Order of Malta. Here he is with Barroso then, as we mentioned before. Hans Paul Göttering, I think this guy's called. Important. Here is with the Pope. Bertie passed away in 2008, I think. And here's the new guy, another British guy, Matthew Festing, fraternizing there with Barroso. He's the current head of the order, as I mentioned. Interesting. And the Knights of Malta have their headquarters on Aventine Hill, one of the 7 hills in Rome as well. If we read from the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry by Albert G. Mackey, a 33rd degree Mason, he writes, "The Knights of Malta are the military of the Pope and are sworn to total obedience by blood oath, which is taken extremely serious and to the death. The Pope, as the head of the Vatican, is also the head of the foreign national power." And we have this whole story of Blackwater popping up here as well. I don't know if you're aware of that. This guy right here standing behind there it is again, the pentacle, that's the whole symbol. The former Pentagon Inspector General, Joseph Edward Schmitz, he quits in 2005 after he promoted the whole fraudulent, weapons of mass destruction thing. Goes to work for Blackwater. He quit then, right, in 2005. Goes to work for Blackwater. He's a member of Opus Dei and the Knights of Malta. He helped to bring this in. This is a re-emergence in one way of the Holy Crusades. That's what's going on here. Some of the other founding fathers. Robert Schumann, could talk about him quite a lot. We don't have too much time right now. I want to try to keep to the schedule that we have as well. John Monnet, other very important guy. But I'll leave you with a few sources in case you want to look at some of the modern corruption actually within the European Union. The Great European Ripoff by David Craig and Matthew Elliott. Fantastic expose of, as I mentioned, the modern corruption, the wasteful nature actually of the European Union. Martha Andreasen, lovely lady. We had her on our radio program, by the way. You can go and listen to the full hour interview we did with her in terms of her book and what she's been up to. Brussels laid bare. She was chief accountant to the EU and refused to sign off the accounts because she felt that the EU was, their accounting system was an open till waiting to be robbed. There was so much corruption there. She quit. It's a whole story about that too. Check it out on the website. Blowing the Whistle, Paul von Buitenen, also showing the corruption in the European Commission, mostly through the use of fictitious and questionable contracts with outside consultants. Finally, The Great Deception, Christopher Booker, Richard North, also very interesting. Some of it goes into a little bit more on the background in terms of that. And all this thing, just to briefly round up here, that is what I call corruption allowed within the European Union in that sense. They want to... The weird quirk. We're working on a DVD to put this all together for you in terms of the modern corruption of the EU as well. So many things that I haven't had time to talk about. We just looked at the symbolism and some of the background. But I feel that they, in one way, just be aware of this, that they want to show how corrupt the European Union is. Because they want to bring in, they want the people to demand a stronger leader in that sense. They want the people to say, this corruption can't go on. We got to have someone who's more powerful. can oversee this. Someone has more power, where transparency is given to these people as well. And that's basically this, and we hope to elaborate more on these points further on as well. There's so much more to talk about, but just be aware of that I think the corruption and the exposure of the corruption within the EU is allowed in that sense, and it's a work in progress. They're building on the European Union and have done that for a long time, and it's continuing. So we'll just have to see what happens. But as a final note, keep your eye, or if you're interested, on our website, redicecreations.com. We will keep you updated and posted on all the things that we do, and hopefully we'll be able to deliver that DVD to you as well if you're interested in that, finding out some more stuff. So with that, thank you very much for your time. Try to stick to the schedule. to reach it. Keep that in mind as well. And this is one passing through the zodiac. It forms the origin of the myth of the Cretan bull and one of the 12 labors of Heracles or Hercules. So let's just look quickly here at what we are looking at. She came from the ancient world, this Phoenician princess. She travels willingly or just she's abducted, as it were, by Zeus from Tyre in Lebanon. This is the modern name that we have for it now. Over to Crete, the bottom of Europa pretty much. This might be symbolic in one reference as well of the age of Taurus transitioning over to the age of Aries. Keep that in mind as well, we'll touch upon that later. So she came from the land of Canaan, the ancient world. She was a Phoenician princess, as I mentioned today, Tyre in Lebanon. There's a very interesting connection in terms of Tyre as well when it comes to something called Tyrrhenian purple, or royal imperial purple. And there's actually a relationship between the Minoans of Crete and the Tyrrhenians and how this was extracted, but we don't have simply time to go into that right now. So here's Europa, the Phoenician princess, the goddess, if you will, depicted on an old map. This is known as theurgy in some circles. You take the goddess, you take some heavenly image in a way and place it over to the physical, onto the physical land itself. And this is kind of representing the completion of that. Allegedly, Charlemagne also was the one who dubbed the continent after Europa. So what's in Crete? As I mentioned, we have the Knossos Palace, magnificent building, sometimes referred to as the Knossos Palace of King Minos, sometimes just called the Labyrinth. I think there's similarity in terms of the words Knossos and Gnosis, or knowledge, if you will. Interesting side note there. And even the idea of the labyrinth could be a veiled term for the brain, actually, if you look at it. The statuette there is that she is probably a depiction of Europa. That same legend is carried over into Crete. So I believe that statue actually is Europa in that sense. And the relationship is to Eve here. The snake goddess of Gnosis, Gnostic knowledge, etc. The apples of enlightenment comes up in Norse mythology as well. The story of Idun or Idun. She is the guardian, if you will, of the apples, or the fruit of knowledge. She was a wife of Bragi, a wise deity related to the moon. So who is Europa anyway, if we ask that question? Protestant minister Alexander Hislop writes in The Two Babylons, 1853, that Semiramis was an actual person in ancient Mesopotamia who invented polytheism and with it goddess worship. I personally don't believe that that's the case. I think goddess worship probably was around before the worship of a god. Before that probably was animal worship, like the bull, the snakes as we saw, the bear or something. But anyway, let's leave that for now. Just continue and see what he has to say here. Hislop believed that Semiramis was a consort of Nimrod, builder of the Bible's Tower of Babel. Keep that in mind as that come up later as well. He maintained that all divine pairings in world myths and religions depicted in art, like Isis, Osiris, Aphrodite, Cupid, Asherah, Orion, Mary, Jesus, and others, are retelling of that same tale in one way of Semiramis and Tammuz. And Semiramis, he says, goes on to become the Blessed Virgin Mary, according to Hislop's books. This attempts to support his claim that Roman Catholicism is, in fact, paganism. I think that there is something to this story in terms of, if we compare mythologies from around the world, it seems to be a central theme that is brought up again and again. And I think we can do the divine pairing here of Europa or Zeus as well, or at least... but let's begin at the beginning of the story, Europa, and talk about the mythology pretty much, and see where the story begins. It goes like this pretty much, that Zeus, king of the gods, saw Europa gathering flowers at the sea. He fell in love with her. He transformed himself into a form of a magnificent white bull and appeared at the seashore where Europa was playing. The great bull walked gently over to where Europa stood. She put flowers around his neck, climbed up on his back, overcoming her fear of the great beast. Suddenly the bull rushed out to the sea, abducting Europa. Zeus took Europa to the Mediterranean island of Crete. And there Zeus cast off the shape of the white bull and back into his human form made Europa his lover. Europa became the first queen of Crete and had by Zeus 3 sons, one of these being King Minos of Crete. She later married the king of Crete, who adopted her sons, and she was worshipped under the name of Helotia in Crete. Zeus also represented, or reproduced rather, the shape of the white bull in the stars. Today we can recognize its shape as the constellation of Taurus. And university professor from Munich, Michael Rappengluck, believes that Taurus is represented in a cave painting at the Hall of the Bulls in the caves at Lascaux in France, dated to roughly about 15,000 BC, which he believes is accompanied by a depiction of the Pleiades. Taurus marked this point of the vernal equinox in the early Bronze Age. This is the age of Taurus we're talking about here. The Pleiades were closest to the sun at the vernal equinox around the 23rd century BC. In Babylonian astronomy, the constellation was listed as the heavenly bull. In Greek mythology, Taurus was identified with Zeus, as we just mentioned, and the myth informs names of the constellation since it's necessary to traverse the area of the sky known as the sea, or the heaven that way from the outside, with its all its little shapes and pathways and neural networks even in one way. So it could be implying intelligence or reasoning or thought, if you will. But look at the snake goddess here. That's what's interesting in this too. This is a Minoan statuette from around 1600 BCE. She's holding 2 snakes in her hands, in some way implying that she is mastering the snake, in that sense. Could also be knowledge of DNA, by the way. She has a bare breast. This will come up later. Keep that in mind. And just as a side note, here is actually a runestone from Gotland in Sweden, where I'm from, that is very similar. I don't know if everyone can see that. It's down at the bottom there. Very similar to this goddess as well, obviously, holding 2 snakes and so forth. There is a relationship between many Norse ancient civilizations and the Middle Eastern civilizations as well, I believe. And just to kind of emphasize our point further, Will Durant, who wrote the book The Life of Greece, The Story of Civilization in 1939, said about the Minoan civilization that it's the first link in the European chain, and that just kind of just emphasizes our point of what I'm trying to get to here in that sense. So let's look at the etymology of Europa. She's a watcher in a way, you can say. Eur, meaning broad or wide. Op or opt or opa means eye. So in one way she has big eyes, she's wide-gazing, she has intelligence, she's open-minded. In one way she's enlightened because she has these big eyes, as it were. You can even see the kind of bug-eyed look that statuette has right there. Pretty creepy, but interesting. The question is then if we can look at Eve actually in the same way. I call her another kind of snake goddess because of the fact that she has a relationship with the snake. She gains knowledge by eating from the fruit or the apples from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So the question I pose here is Eve Europa, because the idea of the Minoan I guess what I can say first, for all of you who don't know who I am, my name is Henrik Palmgrens. I come from Sweden, behind the website Red Eyes Creations. We do radio programs and news updates, tons of other stuff as well. And very thankful for Karen for inviting me. This is my first public talk, by the way, so thank you for Karen for giving me the opportunity to present some of the information about some of this stuff. And I'm going to move quite fast through some of the information, so hopefully you'll be able to keep up. I have tons of slides to show you in terms of the hidden roots of the European Union. There's lots to say, obviously, so much to say, so much information. I will do my best to give you an idea of what we are talking about here. I've chosen to focus on a few things. Mythology, symbols, the founding fathers, the official and unofficial origins, pretty much, of the European Union. The Roman Catholic connection, symbolism of the treaties of the European Union, And all these symbols you see down here obviously are connected to what I'll be talking about. IHS, Jesuits, the international pan-European movement or union, the Knights of Malta, a little bit on Freemasonry, a little bit on Zionism as well. There's a lot of connections here that there's just simply not time to go into. But these are all part of it. The House of Habsburg right there, the Vatican, the Holy See, and the British royal family a little bit as well is some of the things that I'll be touching upon.